Picture this. You're walking down a busy street when suddenly, police officers surround you, handcuffs clicking shut around your wrists. The charge? Impersonating a military officer. The twist? You actually outrank every soldier they've ever met, and tomorrow morning, you'll be briefing the president on the most classified mission in American history. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Commander Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose secret life was so classified that even the police who arrested her had no idea they were detaining one of America's most powerful military leaders. What happened next would expose the hidden world of elite special operations and challenge everything we think we know about who really protects our nation. Sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened. The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening in downtown Norfolk, Virginia. Sarah Mitchell pulled her military jacket tighter as she hurried toward the coffee shop where she was supposed to meet her contact. At 34, she looked younger than her age, with shoulder-length brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. To anyone passing by, she appeared to be just another service member heading home after a long day. But Sarah Mitchell was far from ordinary. She held one of the most classified positions in the United States military, commanding a special operations unit so secret that its existence was known only to a handful of people at the highest levels of government. Tonight's meeting was crucial for an operation that could save hundreds of American lives overseas. As she crossed the street, two police officers approached her from opposite directions. Something felt wrong immediately. Sarah's training kicked in, her senses heightening as she assessed the situation. The officers looked tense, their hands positioned near their weapons. "Excuse me, miss," called out Officer Rodriguez, the older of the two. "We need to speak with you." Sarah stopped, keeping her hands visible. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We've received reports of someone impersonating a military officer in this area," Officer Rodriguez continued, his eyes scanning her uniform. "Can you provide identification proving you're authorized to wear that uniform?" The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Here she was, one of the most highly decorated officers in the Navy, being questioned about wearing her own uniform. But the nature of her work meant that her real identity and rank were buried so deep in classified systems that these local officers would never be able to verify them through normal channels. "I can show you my military ID," Sarah replied calmly, slowly reaching for her wallet. Officer Martinez, the younger officer, stepped closer. "Ma'am, we've had several reports this week of civilians wearing military uniforms to get discounts at local businesses. It's a federal crime to impersonate a member of the armed forces." Sarah handed over her military identification card. Officer Rodriguez examined it carefully, then walked back to his patrol car to run it through the system. Sarah knew what would happen next. Her cover identity would show up as a low-level administrative clerk stationed at a nearby base. It was designed to deflect attention, not to impress anyone. After several minutes, Officer Rodriguez returned with a confused expression. "According to our system, you're listed as a petty officer 3rd class assigned to desk duty. But you're wearing the uniform of a much higher rank. The insignia on your collar indicates you hold the rank of commander. There must be some mistake in your system," Sarah said, maintaining her calm demeanor. She couldn't blow her cover, even now. "I can call my commanding officer if needed." Officer Martinez shook his head. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to place you under arrest for impersonating a military officer. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Sarah's mind raced. She had protocols for situations like this, but using them would expose her real identity and potentially compromise ongoing operations. 3 months of planning for tomorrow's mission could be destroyed if the wrong people started asking questions about why a desk clerk was really a special operations commander. The police car pulled away from the curb, and Sarah watched the coffee shop disappear in the rearview mirror. Her contact would wait for 15 minutes, then disappear according to protocol. The operation that was supposed to launch in 36 hours was now in jeopardy. At the Norfolk Police Department, Sarah was processed like any other suspect. Her fingerprints were taken, her photo was snapped, and she was placed in a holding cell with 3 other women who had been arrested that evening. One was there for shoplifting, another for drunk driving, and the third for disorderly conduct. "What are you in for, honey?" asked the woman arrested for shoplifting, a middle-aged lady with kind eyes and a tired expression. "They think I'm impersonating a soldier," Sarah replied, sitting on the hard bench. The drunk driving suspect, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, laughed bitterly. "That's a new one. What's next?" arresting people for wearing police costumes on Halloween. But the third woman, who had been quiet until now, looked at Sarah more carefully. "You're really military, aren't you? I can tell by how you carry yourself." "My brother's a Marine." Sarah nodded, but didn't elaborate. Even in jail, operational security was paramount. Hours passed. Sarah's one phone call had been to a number that would route through several secure systems before reaching her handler. She had used a specific code phrase that would trigger emergency protocols. Now all she could do was wait and hope that the response team could extract her without creating too much attention. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah's handler, Admiral James Harrison, was dealing with a crisis. Harrison was a 60-year-old career officer who had been Sarah's mentor for the past 8 years. He worked out an unmarked office in a building that officially didn't exist on any military base. When his secure phone rang with Sarah's coded message, he immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Give me the Norfolk Police Department on the line," he told his aide, "and wake up the Secretary of Defense. We have a problem." The challenge was enormous. Sarah's real identity was so classified that revealing it to local law enforcement could create a security breach. But leaving her in jail meant that tomorrow's operation, which had taken months to plan and involved coordinating with foreign intelligence services, would have to be scrapped. Admiral Harrison had been in the military for 38 years, but he had never faced a situation quite like this. How do you prove someone is who they say they are when their very existence is classified at the highest levels of government? Back at the police station, Detective Lisa Park was working the night shift when she received an unusual call. The caller identified himself as being from the Department of Defense and said he needed to speak with her about a prisoner they had in custody. "We don't typically get calls from the Pentagon about our local arrests," Detective Park told her partner, Detective Williams. "This woman must be more than she appears." Detective Park pulled Sarah's file and reviewed it again. Something about the arrest didn't add up. The woman had been calm and professional throughout the booking process, showing none of the nervousness typically displayed by people who had been caught in a lie. Her physical fitness was obvious even through the standard jail uniform, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "Let's talk to her again," Detective Park suggested. When they brought Sarah into the interview room, she maintained the same composed demeanor she had shown all evening. Detective Park noticed that Sarah's posture was perfect, her eyes alert, and her responses measured and thoughtful. "Ms. Mitchell, we've received some interesting calls about you tonight," Detective Park began. "People at very high levels seem concerned about your situation." Sarah knew she was walking a tightrope. "I've told you the truth, Detective. I am who my identification says I am. But your ID says you're a petty officer 3rd class, and you were wearing commander's insignia. Can you explain that discrepancy?" For the first time that evening, Sarah hesitated. She couldn't reveal the truth without authorization from her superiors, but continuing to lie might make the situation worse. Sometimes military personnel are assigned to special duties that require flexible arrangements regarding uniform protocols, Sarah said carefully. Detective Williams leaned forward. "What kind of special duties?" "The kind I'm not authorized to discuss with local law enforcement," Sarah replied. The room fell silent. Detective Park studied Sarah's face, looking for signs of deception. What she saw instead was the controlled tension of someone keeping important secrets, not the guilty panic of someone caught in a lie. "We're going to need to hold you until we can sort this out," Detective Park said finally. "The people calling about you say they're sending someone to speak with us, but it won't be until tomorrow morning." As Sarah was led back to her cell, she calculated the time remaining before her scheduled operation. In 18 hours, she was supposed to brief a Navy SEAL team on a rescue mission that would take place in hostile territory. The intelligence window was narrow, and the lives of American hostages hung in the balance. The other women in the cell had been replaced by new arrivals during the evening hours. Now Sarah shared the space with a woman arrested for assault and another charged with drug possession. Both kept to themselves, which suited Sarah fine. She closed her eyes and began running through the mission details in her mind. Even if she was released in the morning, the operation might have to be delayed. Delay meant that the enemy would have more time to move the hostages to a location where rescue would be impossible. At 3 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to the Norfolk Police Department. 2 men in dark suits got out and walked purposefully toward the entrance. They carried credentials that would open doors and conversations. The complicated part would be explaining Sarah's situation without revealing information that could compromise national security. Detective Park was called back to the station even though her shift had ended hours earlier. When she arrived, she found the two federal agents waiting in the chief's office. They introduced themselves as Agent Collins from the FBI and Agent Thompson from the Department of Defense. "We need to discuss Sarah Mitchell," Agent Collins said without preamble. "The woman arrested for impersonating a military officer?" Detective Park asked. "The woman arrested for wearing her own uniform," Agent Thompson corrected. "Ms. Mitchell is exactly who she says she is, but her real rank and position are classified information that we cannot share with local law enforcement." Detective Park felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you telling me we arrested someone who actually outranks the officers who brought her in?" Agent Collins nodded grimly. "By several pay grades. And her current assignment is critical to national security." The chief of police, who had been called in for this meeting, shook his head in disbelief. "How are my officers supposed to know?" Her ID showed her as a low-ranking petty officer. "Her cover identity is designed to protect ongoing operations," Agent Thompson explained. "Unfortunately, it also created this situation." Detective Park realized the implications were staggering. "What do we do now?" "You release her immediately, seal all records of this arrest, and we all pretend this never happened," Agent Collins said. "Ms. Mitchell has a mission briefing in 14 hours that cannot be delayed." As the sun began to rise over Norfolk, Sarah was quietly released from custody. No paperwork was filed, no court date was set, and no record of her arrest remained in the system. To the outside world, she had never been detained at all. But the damage had already been done. Sarah's cover identity was now compromised, known to local law enforcement and documented in federal databases. The carefully constructed facade that had protected her for years was cracking, and the consequences would ripple through the secret world of special operations in ways no one could have predicted. Sarah drove her unmarked car through the pre-dawn darkness toward a facility that didn't appear on any map. The events of the previous night had shaken her more than she cared to admit. In 8 years of commanding special operations, she had never had her cover blown by local police officers doing their job. It was a reminder of how precarious her double life really was. The facility she was heading to was known only as Building 47 to those with clearance to enter. Located 20 miles outside Norfolk on land, officially designated as a wildlife preserve, it housed one of the most elite units in the American military. The men and women who worked there had no official rank, no public recognition, and no expectation of glory. They existed in the shadows, carrying out missions that would never be acknowledged by any government. Sarah's real name wasn't even Sarah Mitchell. She had been born Rebecca Sarah Chan in San Francisco to parents who had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s. Her father was a mathematics professor at UC Berkeley, her mother a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. They had named their daughter Rebecca, hoping she would follow a traditional path toward academic success and a quiet life. But Rebecca had always been drawn to challenges that others avoided. In high school, she excelled not just in academics, but in competitive swimming and martial arts. Her parents watched with mixed pride and concern as their brilliant daughter chose increasingly difficult paths. When she announced her intention to join the Navy after graduating summa cum laude from MIT with a degree in electrical engineering, they were devastated. "You could work for any technology company in Silicon Valley," her mother had pleaded. "Why throw away your potential on the military?" What her parents didn't understand was that Rebecca saw the military as the ultimate challenge, a place where she could push her capabilities beyond what civilian life offered. She had no interest in designing consumer electronics or maximizing corporate profits. She wanted to serve something larger than herself, even if it meant sacrificing the comfortable life her parents had worked so hard to provide for her. Naval officer training had been demanding, but straightforward. Rebecca excelled in every category, finishing first in her class and earning the respect of instructors who had initially doubted whether a small Asian woman could handle the physical demands of military service. Her engineering background opened doors to specialized training programs, and her language skills, she spoke Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese, and Korean fluently, made her valuable for assignments in the Pacific region. But it was her performance during a classified exercise in her third year of service that changed everything. Rebecca had been part of a team tasked with infiltrating a mock terrorist facility and extracting valuable intelligence. The exercise was designed to test conventional tactical approaches, but Rebecca saw flaws in the plan that could lead to unnecessary casualties. Against orders, she had devised an alternative approach that relied on electronic warfare and psychological operations rather than direct assault. Her plan was more complex and required precise timing, but it would complete the mission with zero friendly casualties and minimal collateral damage. When she presented her alternative to the exercise commanders, they initially dismissed it as too risky. Rebecca implemented her plan anyway, working alone and outside the established command structure. In 18 minutes, she had neutralized the mock terrorist threat, extracted all required intelligence, and demonstrated weaknesses in the base's security systems that had gone unnoticed for years. The official response was a formal reprimand for disobeying orders. The unofficial response was a transfer to a unit that didn't officially exist under the command of then Captain James Harrison. Harrison had been watching the exercise and recognized that Rebecca Chun represented a new kind of military officer, someone who could think beyond traditional boundaries and adapt to threats that hadn't been imagined when current tactics were developed. Traditional warfare is ending, Harrison had told her during their first meeting. The future belongs to small, highly trained teams that can operate independently in hostile environments. We need people who can think like engineers, fight like commandos, and disappear like ghosts. Rebecca's transformation into Sarah Mitchell began with 6 months of training at facilities scattered across the United States. She learned advanced electronics and computer systems at Fort Gordon, Georgia. She mastered close-quarters combat and weapons systems at a ranch in Montana that was owned by former CIA operatives. She studied foreign languages and cultural infiltration at a school in Arizona that was run by retired diplomats and international business executives. But the most challenging part of her training was psychological. Rebecca Chun had to disappear completely, replaced by Sarah Mitchell, a fictional persona with a carefully constructed background. Sarah had grown up in Nebraska, graduated from a small college in Iowa, and joined the Navy to see the world. She was friendly, but not memorable, competent, but not exceptional, the kind of person who could blend into any crowd. The process of becoming Sarah Mitchell involved more than just memorizing a fake biography. Rebecca had to learn to think differently, to suppress the intellectual curiosity and competitive drive that defined her real personality. Sarah Mitchell was pleasant and professional, but she never stood out, never asked probing questions, never demonstrated capabilities that would draw attention. For 5 years, Sarah Mitchell worked in various administrative positions while Rebecca Chun trained for missions that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. She learned to hack into foreign computer systems from thousands of miles away. She mastered the art of psychological manipulation, learning to turn enemies into assets without them realizing they had been compromised. She became fluent in Arabic, Farsi, and Russian, adding to her already impressive linguistic abilities. But perhaps most importantly, she learned to work with the most elite soldiers in the American military. The men and women under her command were drawn from Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Marine Force Reconnaissance, and Air Force Special Operations. They were the best of the best, and they had initially resented taking orders from someone they saw as a desk officer with no combat experience. That perception changed during a training exercise in the Nevada desert. Sarah's team had been tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy facility defended by former Special Operations soldiers acting as opposing forces. Traditional tactics would have required a direct assault with significant risk of casualties. Instead, Sarah had spent 3 days studying the facility's electronic systems, the behavioral patterns of the defending forces, and the psychological profiles of their commanders. When the exercise began, she didn't send her team through the front door. She spent 6 hours systematically dismantling the facility's defenses from the inside, using electronic warfare to turn their own security systems against them. By the time her team entered the facility, the opposing forces were confused, demoralized, and convinced they were facing a much larger enemy. The exercise that was supposed to last 3 days ended in 8 hours, with Sarah's team achieving complete victory without firing a single shot. "How did you do that?" asked Master Chief Petty Officer Mike Rodriguez after the exercise. Rodriguez was a 15-year Navy SEAL veteran who had been skeptical of serving under a young officer with no combat deployments. "I studied them," Sarah replied simply. I learned how they think, what they fear, and what they expect. Then I gave them something different. From that day forward, the men and women under Sarah's command understood that they weren't serving with a traditional military officer. They were working with someone who had redefined what warfare could look like in the 21st century. Now, as Sarah pulled into the parking lot of Building 47, she reflected on how far she had come from her parents' dreams of academic success. In a few hours, she would brief a team of Navy SEALs on a mission that would take them into one of the most dangerous regions in the world. The intelligence she had gathered over the past 3 months indicated that American contractors were being held hostage in a compound that was defended by some of the most sophisticated security systems money could buy. The mission would require everything she had learned about electronic warfare, psychological operations, and small unit tactics. But it would also require her team to trust her completely, even when her orders seemed to contradict everything they had been trained to do. Sarah entered Building 47 through a security checkpoint that scanned her biometrics and checked her identity against databases maintained by 3 different intelligence agencies. The interior of the building looked like a high-tech corporate office, with modern furniture and artwork that gave no hint of its true purpose. Admiral Harrison was waiting for her in the briefing room. He looked tired, and Sarah realized that her arrest the night before had probably kept him awake dealing with damage control. "How bad is it?" she asked without preamble. "Your cover identity is compromised beyond repair," Harrison replied. "Too many people know about last night's incident. We're going to have to create a new persona for you after this mission." Sarah felt a strange sense of loss. Sarah Mitchell had been her identity for 8 years, longer than any other role she had played. The thought of becoming someone else again was exhausting. "What about the mission?" she asked. "Still on schedule. The SEALs are arriving in 2 hours for the final briefing. But, Sarah, this might be your last mission under this identity. The Security Review Board is concerned that your effectiveness has been compromised." Sarah understood the implications. If she couldn't maintain a convincing cover identity, she couldn't work in the field. She would be transferred to a desk job, analyzing intelligence gathered by others instead of leading missions herself. It was a kind of professional death for someone who lived for the challenges of special operations. "Then, we'd better make this mission count," she said. Admiral Harrison smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that, because what I'm about to show you changes everything we thought we knew about this hostage situation." He activated a large display screen that showed satellite imagery of a compound in Somalia. The facility looked like a combination of military base and corporate headquarters, with high walls, guard towers, and what appeared to be sophisticated electronic surveillance equipment. "Our hostages aren't just contractors," Harrison continued. "They're engineers who were working on a classified project for the Department of Defense. The people holding them aren't typical terrorists or criminals. They're highly trained operatives working for a foreign intelligence service." Sarah studied the images carefully. The compound's defenses were far more sophisticated than anything she had seen in previous missions. This wouldn't be a simple extraction. It would be a battle between 2 groups of elite operatives, fought with the most advanced technology available. "How many hostages?" she asked. 4. All of them are critical to projects that could affect American national security if their knowledge falls into the wrong hands. Time frame. The intelligence window closes in 72 hours. After that, we have reason to believe the hostages will be moved to a location where rescue would be impossible. Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came with a truly challenging mission. This was what she lived for, the opportunity to pit her skills against an enemy that was as smart and well-equipped as she was. "I'll need complete operational authority," she said. "No interference from Washington, no second-guessing from desk officers who have never been in the field." "You'll have it," Harrison confirmed. "But, Sarah, if this mission fails, it won't just be your career that's over. The technology these engineers were working on could change the balance of power in several regions of the world." Sarah understood. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a battle for information that could determine the outcome of conflicts that hadn't even started yet. She spent the next hour reviewing intelligence reports, satellite imagery, and psychological profiles of the enemy operatives. By the time the SEALs arrived for their briefing, she had formulated a plan that was unlike anything she had attempted before. It would require her team to trust her completely, even when every instinct told them they were walking into a trap. The briefing room at Building 47 fell silent as 6 Navy SEALs filed in and took their seats around the conference table. These weren't ordinary special operations soldiers. Each man had been handpicked for this unit based on skills that went far beyond traditional military training. They were experts in advanced technology, foreign languages, and unconventional warfare tactics that most soldiers never even heard about. Leading the team was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a 12-year SEAL veteran who stood 6 feet 4 inches and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived more combat deployments than most soldiers see in entire careers. Thompson had grown up in inner-city Detroit, where survival meant being smarter and tougher than everyone around you. The Navy had given him direction and purpose, but it was his natural intelligence and ability to adapt to any situation that made him valuable for special operations. Beside him sat Petty Officer First Class David Kim, a Korean-American electronics expert who could hack into almost any computer system and disable security networks that were supposed to be impenetrable. Kim had joined the Navy after graduating from Carnegie Mellon with a degree in computer science, but he found that designing software for civilian companies wasn't challenging enough. He wanted to use his skills for something that mattered, even if it meant risking his life in places most people couldn't find on a map. The team's medic was Petty Officer Second Class Roberto Martinez, whose skills went far beyond basic battlefield medicine. Martinez had been a paramedic in Los Angeles before joining the Navy, and he had learned to save lives under the worst possible conditions. During his military training, he had also studied psychology and interrogation techniques, making him valuable for missions that required understanding the human mind as well as the human body. Petty Officer First Class John Anderson was the team's weapons expert, a quiet man from rural Montana who could shoot with precision that bordered on supernatural. Anderson had been hunting since he was 8 years old, and he understood firearms the way some people understood musical instruments. But his real talent was for improvisation, creating effective weapons from materials that others would consider junk. The team's communications specialist was Petty Officer Second Class Alex Turner, a former college professor who had joined the Navy at age 32 after deciding that teaching political science wasn't contributing enough to national security. Turner spoke 7 languages fluently and understood the cultural nuances that could mean the difference between success and failure when operating in foreign countries. Finally, there was Petty Officer Third Class James Wright, the youngest member of the team at 26. Wright was an expert in close-quarters combat and infiltration, with an ability to move silently through hostile territory that had earned him the nickname Ghost from his teammates. Wright had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, where he learned to track animals and move through difficult terrain without being detected. These 6 men had worked together for 3 years, developing the kind of trust and coordination that only comes from shared danger and mutual respect. They had completed missions in 12 different countries, always successfully and always without public recognition. To the outside world, they were just another military unit. To the enemies of the United States, they were legends whispered about in fearful conversations. As Sarah entered the briefing room, she could feel the weight of their collective gaze. Despite their respect for her abilities, she knew that some part of them still struggled with taking orders from someone who looked like she could be their younger sister. At 5 feet 6 inches and 120 pounds, Sarah didn't fit the traditional image of a military commander. But these men had learned not to judge based on appearances. "Gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate attention," Sarah began, activating the display screen that showed the satellite imagery of the compound in Somalia. 4 American engineers are being held hostage in this facility. Our intelligence indicates they will be moved to a more secure location in 68 hours. Chief Thompson studied the images carefully. That's not a typical terrorist hideout. Those defenses look military grade. Because they are, Sarah confirmed. We're not dealing with ordinary criminals or religious extremists. The people holding our engineers are professional operatives working for a foreign intelligence service. They have training comparable to ours, equipment as advanced as anything we use, and the advantage of defending prepared positions on familiar ground. Petty Officer Kim leaned forward, pointing to what looked like electronic surveillance equipment mounted on the compound walls. Those sensor arrays are Russian-made, probably military surplus from their special forces. They'll detect movement, heat signatures, and electronic emissions from at least a mile away. Which is why we're not going to sneak up on them, Sarah said, surprising everyone in the room. Traditional infiltration tactics won't work against defenders who are as skilled as we are. We need to try something different. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed layout of the compound's interior. Intelligence gathered from human sources indicates that the hostages are being held in this central building. The facility has 3 layers of security: perimeter defenses that include motion sensors and automated weapon systems, human guards with military training and modern equipment, and electronic countermeasures designed to jam our communications and interfere with our equipment. Petty Officer Anderson studied the defensive positions. How many guards? Approximately 20, working in shifts. They're professional soldiers, probably former special forces from various countries. They're not ideologically motivated, which means they're fighting for money rather than belief. That gives us some psychological advantages we can exploit. Sarah clicked to another slide showing psychological profiles of the enemy commanders. The facility is run by a former Russian Spetsnaz officer named Viktor Kozlov. He's smart, experienced, and ruthless, but he's also overconfident, and he tends to rely on technology rather than human intuition. Chief Thompson nodded slowly. So we find a way to turn his strengths against him. Exactly. Kozlov expects us to try infiltrating his compound using traditional special operations tactics. He's prepared for helicopter assaults, underwater approaches, and stealth infiltration. What he's not prepared for is a frontal assault that doesn't follow any conventional military doctrine. The room fell silent as the SEALs tried to process what Sarah was suggesting. Frontal assaults were what armies did, not what special operations teams attempted. Elite soldiers succeeded by being smarter and more subtle than their enemies, not by charging directly into defended positions. Petty Officer Martinez was the first to speak. Commander, a frontal assault against prepared defenses is suicide. Those guards have automatic weapons, grenade launchers, and defensive positions that give them every advantage. It would be suicide if we fought them on their terms, Sarah agreed. But we're not going to fight them at all. We're going to make them fight each other. She activated a new display that showed the compound's electronic systems in detail. David, how long would it take you to hack into their security network? Kim studied the technical specifications. If I had physical access to their main server, maybe 30 minutes. But getting to their server would require getting inside the compound first. What if you didn't need physical access? What if their own security systems gave you a way in? Sarah clicked to another slide showing the compound's power grid and communication networks. This facility depends on sophisticated electronic systems for everything from lighting to life support. But sophisticated systems have sophisticated vulnerabilities. She pointed to a series of connection points on the diagram. These systems are all networked together for efficiency and ease of management. That networking creates opportunities for someone with the right skills to cause selective system failures. The understanding slowly dawned on Kim's face. You want me to create cascading failures that make it look like different systems are malfunctioning independently. More than that, I want you to create failures that make the guards think they're under attack by multiple teams approaching from different directions. When people are scared and confused, they make mistakes. When professional soldiers make mistakes, those mistakes can be fatal. Chief Thompson was beginning to understand the scope of Sarah's plan. You want to turn their own paranoia against them. Viktor Kozlov has survived this long by assuming that everyone is trying to kill him. Tonight, we're going to prove him right, but not in the way he expects. Sarah spent the next hour walking the team through every aspect of the plan. It was complex and dangerous, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. Each team member would have multiple responsibilities, and failure at any point could doom the entire mission. The plan began with Kim hacking into the compound's external communication systems from a position 2 miles away. He would create false electronic signatures that suggested multiple teams were approaching the facility from different directions. The defenders would detect what appeared to be helicopter movements, vehicle approaches, and infantry units moving through the surrounding terrain. While the guards were responding to these phantom threats, Turner would use his linguistic abilities to intercept and manipulate their radio communications. Speaking in accented English and Russian, he would create confusion by issuing contradictory orders and spreading false information about American troop movements. Anderson would provide sniper support from a concealed position, but his primary job wouldn't be killing enemy soldiers. Instead, he would create precisely timed equipment failures by shooting specific components of the compound's external systems. A damaged power line here, a destroyed communication antenna there, each carefully planned to support the illusion that the facility was under coordinated attack. Martinez would be responsible for creating diversions using improvised explosive devices and smoke grenades. His psychological training would help him understand how the defenders were likely to react to different types of threats, allowing him to manipulate their responses. Wright would handle the actual infiltration, using his stealth skills to enter the compound while the guards were distracted by the apparent attacks from multiple directions. His job was to reach the hostages and prepare them for extraction. Thompson would coordinate the entire operation, making real-time decisions as the situation developed. His experience in multiple combat deployments had taught him to adapt quickly when plans encountered unexpected obstacles. And Sarah would be in the center of it all, monitoring electronic communications, analyzing the defenders' responses, and adjusting the plan as needed to exploit weaknesses as they appeared. "This is unlike anything we've attempted before," Thompson said when Sarah finished explaining the plan. "We're basically trying to drive them crazy rather than defeat them militarily. Because defeating them militarily isn't possible with our numbers and equipment," Sarah replied. "But driving them crazy is something we can do if we're smart enough and precise enough." Petty Officer Wright raised his hand. "Commander, what happens if they don't react the way we expect? What if Kozlov figures out what we're doing? Then we fall back to traditional extraction tactics and hope for the best," Sarah admitted. "But I've studied Kozlov's background and psychological profile. He's a conventional military thinker who relies on superior firepower and defensive positions. He's not prepared for psychological warfare that attacks his assumptions rather than his soldiers." Kim was reviewing the technical aspects of the plan on his laptop. "The electronic warfare components are feasible, but I'll need specialized equipment that isn't standard issue." "Already arranged," Sarah said. "Everything you need will be on the helicopter that takes us to the staging area." Anderson looked thoughtful. "The shooting angles are challenging, but possible. I'll need to get into position at least 2 hours before the operation begins." "Turner, what about the communication intercepts?" Sarah asked. "I can handle the Russian communications, and my Arabic is good enough to deal with any local contacts they might have. The challenge will be coordinating multiple false signals simultaneously." Sarah nodded. "Martinez, are you confident about the psychological aspects?" "People under stress make predictable mistakes," Martinez confirmed. "If we can create enough confusion and apparent threats, they'll start seeing enemies everywhere." Chief Thompson stood up and looked each of his team members in the eye. "This mission is voluntary. Anyone who wants to opt out can do so now, no questions asked." None of the men moved. They had worked together too long and trusted each other too much to abandon the mission now. "All right then," Thompson said. "When do we leave?" Sarah checked her watch. "Wheels up in 4 hours. We'll stage from a ship in international waters, then use helicopters for the final approach. The operation begins at 0200 local time, when the guards will be at their least alert." As the team members left to gather their equipment and prepare for departure, Sarah remained in the briefing room with Admiral Harrison. She was reviewing the plan one final time, looking for flaws that could doom the mission. "You realize this is either brilliant or insane," Harrison said. "Sometimes there's not much difference between the two," Sarah replied. "But conventional tactics won't work against these defenders. We need to be unconventional. And if it fails?" Sarah looked at the satellite images one more time. "If it fails, for good people die, and some very dangerous technology falls into the wrong hands. So it can't fail." But as she left Building 47 to prepare for what might be her last mission as Sarah Mitchell, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. The plan was solid, but war had a way of destroying even the best plans. In a few hours, she would discover whether her unconventional approach could defeat an enemy that was every bit as skilled and determined as her own team. The USS Hampton cut through the dark waters of the Indian Ocean, its hull barely visible against the moonless sky. Officially, the nuclear submarine was conducting routine patrol operations. In reality, it was serving as a mobile command center for one of the most sensitive operations the Navy had conducted in years. Sarah stood in the submarine's cramped communications center, surrounded by banks of electronic equipment that could intercept and analyze radio transmissions from anywhere in the region. She had been monitoring enemy communications for the past 6 hours, building a detailed picture of the compound's defensive routines and the psychological state of its guards. What she discovered was both encouraging and alarming. The defenders were professional and disciplined, but they were also nervous. Viktor Kozlov had received intelligence suggesting that an American rescue operation was imminent, and he had placed his men on high alert. They were scanning the horizon constantly, checking and rechecking their equipment, and reporting every unusual sound or movement to their commander. "They're wound tight," Sarah told Chief Thompson as he joined her in the communications center. "That's good for us. Nervous people make mistakes." Thompson was reviewing the final equipment checklist on his tablet. "The men are ready. Anderson deployed to his sniper position 2 hours ago, and Kim has established his electronic warfare station. We're just waiting for your go signal." Sarah checked the mission timeline displayed on her laptop screen. Local time is 0145. We begin the operation in 15 minutes. Above them on the submarine's deck, a modified Black Hawk helicopter sat ready for launch. The aircraft had been stripped of all identifying markings and equipped with the latest stealth technology to minimize its radar signature. It would carry Thompson, Wright, Martinez, and Turner to their insertion point, while Sarah remained on the submarine to coordinate the electronic aspects of the operation. The plan they were about to execute was unlike anything attempted in modern special operations. Instead of trying to overwhelm the enemy with superior firepower or stealth, they were going to attack the defenders' minds, creating confusion and paranoia that would cause them to defeat themselves. Sarah activated her headset and connected to the team's communication network. "Control to all stations, sound off." "Overwatch in position," came Anderson's voice from his concealed sniper position overlooking the compound. "I have clear sight lines to all designated targets." "Electronic warfare station ready," reported Kim from his hidden location 2 miles from the enemy facility. "I've identified 7 separate network entry points and confirmed access to their main security system." "Insertion team standing by," Thompson confirmed from the helicopter. "Weather conditions are optimal, and we're ready for immediate deployment." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next few hours would determine not just the success of the mission, but potentially the trajectory of her entire career. If this unconventional approach failed, she would bear responsibility for the deaths of both the hostages and her own team members. "All stations, this is Control. Operation Mind Game is now active. Electronic warfare begin Phase 1. 2 miles from the compound, Kim's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard as he initiated the first stage of their psychological attack. Using sophisticated hacking tools, he began creating false electronic signatures in the compound's perimeter detection systems. To the guards monitoring their screens, it would appear that multiple vehicles were approaching the facility from the east. Inside the compound, the first alarm sounded at exactly 0200 hours. Guard Captain Pavel Volkov, a former Russian paratrooper, studied the electronic displays with growing concern. The sensors were detecting movement patterns consistent with an approaching convoy, but visual observation showed nothing but empty desert. "Control, this is Perimeter Station 1, Volkov reported to his commander. "We're showing vehicle movement from Sector 7, but I can't get visual confirmation." Viktor Kozlov's voice came back immediately over the radio. "All stations, we may have incoming hostiles from the east. Shift defensive positions to cover that approach." This was exactly what Sarah had anticipated. As the guards repositioned themselves to defend against the phantom attack from the east, Anderson began Phase 2 of the operation. Using his precision rifle, he fired a single shot that severed a power cable feeding the compound's western defensive towers. The loss of power to the western towers triggered automatic backup systems, but it also created exactly the kind of equipment failure that would suggest sabotage. More importantly, it drew the guard's attention to a new threat vector just as they were preparing to defend against the false alarm from the east. "We've lost power to the west perimeter," reported another guard. "It looks like the cable was cut." Kozlov's voice became more tense. "Security teams Alpha and Bravo check the western approach. This could be a coordinated attack." As half his defensive force moved to investigate the power failure, Turner initiated Phase 3. Using intercepted radio frequencies and voice modification software, he began broadcasting false communications that appeared to come from American military units. "Delta Team, this is Command," Turner transmitted in perfect military jargon. "Confirm your position and prepare for synchronized assault." "Roger, Command. Delta Team is in position on the North Ridge. We're ready for your signal." The guard monitoring enemy communications immediately reported the intercepts to Kozlov, who now believed he was facing coordinated attacks from at least 3 directions. Sarah watched the compound's communication traffic with satisfaction. The defenders were exactly where she wanted them psychologically, confused, divided, and reacting to threats that existed only in their own minds. Control to insertion team, she transmitted. Defenders are dispersed and distracted. You have a clear window for infiltration. Thompson's helicopter swooped low over the desert, using terrain features to mask its approach. The pilot, a veteran of dozens of covert operations, brought the aircraft to within half a mile of the compound before the team rappelled to the ground. Wright immediately disappeared into the darkness, his movements so silent that even his teammates lost track of his position. Using night vision equipment and his natural ability to move unseen, he began working his way toward the compound's southern wall, the one direction for which the guards weren't expecting an attack. Meanwhile, Martinez was setting up his diversionary devices, using materials that had been carefully selected to create specific psychological effects. He began preparing explosions and smoke screens that would simulate different types of military equipment. Kim continued his electronic assault, now moving into the more sophisticated aspects of the operation. He had gained access to the compound's internal communication system and was beginning to manipulate the information that the guards were receiving from their own sensors. Overwatch to control, Anderson reported. I count 12 guards visible in defensive positions. They're spread thin, covering multiple approach routes. Copy that, Overwatch. Electronic warfare, initiate phase 4. Kim smiled grimly as he executed the next stage of their plan. Using his access to the compound security network, he began creating false sensor readings that suggested infiltrators had already breached the perimeter. Guard stations started receiving alerts indicating movement within the compound itself, movement that didn't exist. The effect on the defenders was immediate and devastating. Guards began reporting contact with enemy infiltrators that they couldn't see. Officers demanded confirmation of movements that weren't happening. The carefully organized defensive plan began falling apart as confusion spread through the ranks. Alpha Team, confirm your position, Kozlov demanded over the radio. Alpha Team is at position 7, sir. We haven't moved. Then, who triggered the sensor at position 12? Unknown, sir. We're not showing any friendlies in that area. Wright used the confusion to slip over the compound's southern wall. The guards who should have been watching that section were now searching for phantom infiltrators in other parts of the facility. He moved through the compound like a ghost, avoiding the remaining guards who were too distracted to maintain proper surveillance. The building holding the hostages was lightly defended, with only 2 guards remaining at their posts while the rest of the security force chased false alarms throughout the compound. Wright observed their patrol pattern for 10 minutes, then moved when both guards were the far end of their route. Inside the building, Wright found the 4 American engineers in a secured room on the 2nd floor. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the team leader, was a 50-year-old electronics expert who had been working on classified radar systems. Her 3 colleagues, Dr. Michael Foster, Dr. Sarah Kim, and Dr. Robert Chun, were specialists in various aspects of advanced military technology. Who are you? Dr. Walsh whispered when Wright appeared in their doorway, like a shadow. United States Navy. We're here to get you out. Wright quickly assessed the hostages' physical condition. They appeared healthy but stressed, exactly what he would expect from people who had been held prisoner for 3 weeks. How many guards? Wright asked. Usually 4 on this building, but most of them left about 20 minutes ago, Dr. Foster replied. There's been a lot of shouting and running around. We thought maybe someone was attacking. Someone is, Wright confirmed, but not in the way they think. Outside, the psychological warfare campaign was reaching its peak. Martinez had begun detonating his diversionary devices in a sequence designed to simulate a coordinated assault by multiple teams. Each explosion was carefully timed and positioned to support the illusion that American forces were closing in from several directions. The sound of explosions triggered panic among the already confused guards. Kozlov's voice became increasingly desperate as he tried to coordinate a defense against enemies he couldn't see. All stations, report your status. Where are these attackers? Perimeter Station 3 reporting explosions to the north. Station 7 shows movement to the east. Station 2 has lost contact with the patrol. Kim exploited the chaos by introducing his final electronic manipulation. Using his access to the compound's communication system, He began broadcasting false orders that appeared to come from Kozlov himself. "All guards fall back to the central building," came a false transmission in Kozlov's voice. "Abandon the perimeter and establish defensive positions around the hostages." Turner immediately countered with a different false order. "Negative, maintain perimeter defense. Do not abandon your posts." The result was complete command breakdown as guards received contradictory orders that both sounded authentic. Some guards obeyed the first order and moved toward the central building. Others followed the second order and remained at their posts. The defensive coordination that Kozlov had spent weeks perfecting dissolved into chaos. Sarah monitored the deteriorating situation with professional satisfaction. The enemy's own communication system was now working against them, spreading confusion rather than coordination. "Control to insertion team," she transmitted. "Enemy command structure is collapsing. You have maximum window for extraction." Wright had already prepared the hostages for movement. Dr. Walsh and her colleagues were weak from their captivity, but they were mobile and mentally alert. Wright led them down a service staircase that avoided the areas where guards might still be present. As they reached the ground floor, Wright could hear the sounds of Kozlov's men searching frantically for attackers who weren't there. Some guards were firing at shadows, convinced they could see enemy soldiers in the darkness. Others were calling out to comrades who weren't responding, unaware that their friends were doing exactly the same thing in different parts of the compound. The extraction route Wright had planned took them through a maintenance area that connected to the compound's vehicle garage. If his timing was correct, the garage should be unguarded as long as the psychological warfare campaign continued to hold the defenders' attention. Thompson and Martinez were moving into position to support the extraction when Anderson's voice cut through the radio chatter with an urgent warning. "Control, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on Kozlov, and he's figured out what's happening." Through his sniper scope, Anderson could see the enemy commander standing in the compound's central courtyard, studying the pattern of explosions and false alarms with the analytical mind of an experienced soldier. Kozlov was pointing at different areas of the compound and speaking rapidly into his radio, and his gestures suggested he was beginning to understand that he had been manipulated. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized their psychological campaign might be losing effectiveness. If Kozlov regained control of his men and reorganized his defenses, the extraction would become exponentially more dangerous. "Electronic warfare. Increase pressure on their communication systems," she ordered. "We need to buy more time." But Kim's response was not what she wanted to hear. "Control, I'm losing access to their network. They're implementing countermeasures faster than I can adapt to them." The tide of the operation was beginning to turn, and Sarah realized that they were about to transition from psychological warfare to direct combat whether they wanted to or not. Viktor Kozlov stood in the center of the compound's courtyard, his trained mind cutting through the chaos that had engulfed his defensive positions. 20 years of military experience had taught him to recognize patterns, and the pattern of false alarms and equipment failures was becoming clear. Someone was playing psychological games with his men, and they were winning. "All stations, this is Control," Kozlov transmitted with renewed authority. "We are under electronic attack designed to create confusion. Ignore all sensor readings and radio communications unless confirmed by visual contact. Establish perimeter security using human observation only." Sarah heard the transmission from her position on the submarine and immediately understood the implications. Kozlov had figured out their strategy and was implementing countermeasures that would neutralize most of their psychological warfare advantages. "Control to all stations," she transmitted urgently. "Enemy commander is adapting to our tactics. Extraction team, you need to move now." Inside the compound, Wright was leading the 4 hostages through the maintenance tunnels when he heard increased radio chatter from guards. The tone had changed from confused panic to disciplined reorganization, and he knew their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Dr. Jennifer Walsh stumbled in the darkness, still weak from weeks of captivity. Wright caught her arm and helped her regain her balance, but the delay cost them precious seconds they couldn't afford to lose. "How much farther?" Dr. Michael Foster whispered. 200 meters to the extraction point," Wright replied quietly. "But we need to move faster." Above them, they could hear guards moving with new purpose as Kozlov's orders restored some semblance of coordination to the defensive effort. The psychological chaos that had been their ally was rapidly giving way to professional military discipline. Chief Thompson and Martinez were positioning themselves to provide covering fire for the extraction when Anderson's voice came through their earpieces with alarming news. Overwatch to all stations. Kozlov is deploying his men in a systematic search pattern. They're moving building by building, and they'll reach the maintenance area in approximately 10 minutes. Sarah studied the tactical display on her laptop screen, watching as the red dots representing enemy guards shifted from random, panicked movements to organized search patterns. Kozlov was good, better than her intelligence reports had suggested. He had recognized the nature of their attack, and was adapting faster than she had anticipated. But Sarah hadn't survived 8 years in special operations by giving up when plans started to fall apart. If psychological warfare was no longer effective, she would adapt her tactics just as quickly as Kozlov had adapted his. Electronic warfare. I need you to stop trying to fool them and start helping us instead, she ordered. Can you access their internal lighting systems? Kim's response came immediately. Affirmative. I have partial access to their power grid. On my mark, I want you to cut power to the entire compound except for the maintenance area where our extraction team is located. Make it look like a cascading system failure rather than sabotage. That will eliminate their electronic surveillance, but it will also make it obvious where our people are located, Kim pointed out. I'm counting on it, Sarah replied. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. Wright heard Sarah's plan through his earpiece and immediately understood her strategy. If the compound went dark except for their location, the guards would naturally assume that the Americans were trying to hide in the darkened areas. They would focus their search on the buildings without power while ignoring the one area that remained lit. Overwatch, I need precise targeting of their backup generators, Sarah continued. When a main power goes down, they'll try to restore it using emergency systems. I need those generators disabled permanently. Anderson adjusted his rifle scope, scanning the compound for the generator housings he had identified during his pre-mission reconnaissance. I can take out 3 of the 4 backup generators with precision shots. The 4th one is inside the building and beyond my line of sight. That's enough. We only need to keep them in the dark for 15 minutes. Turner and Martinez were moving into position to create diversions that would support the extraction when Sarah gave the signal to execute the final phase of the operation. Electronic warfare. Execute power shutdown in 3, 2, 1 mark. The compound plunged into darkness as Kim severed the connections to the main power grid. Emergency lighting activated in some areas, but the maintenance tunnels where Wright was leading the hostages remained brightly lit, powered by an independent system that Kim had deliberately left operational. Anderson's rifle spoke 3 times in rapid succession, his suppressed shots destroying the backup generators with surgical precision. Each shot was perfectly placed to disable the equipment without creating the kind of explosion that would alert the guards to his position. The effect on the compound's defenders was immediate and dramatic. Guards who had been moving in organized search patterns suddenly found themselves stumbling through unfamiliar terrain in near-total darkness. Their night vision equipment helped, but the sudden transition from bright light to darkness had temporarily compromised their natural night vision. Kozlov's voice came over the radio with barely controlled frustration. Engineering, restore power immediately. Security teams, use portable lighting, and continue the search. But Sarah had anticipated this response. As guards began using flashlights and portable floodlights to illuminate their search areas, Turner initiated a series of precisely timed diversions designed to draw their attention away from the maintenance area. Using sound equipment that could project audio from a distance, Turner created the illusion of movement in buildings throughout the compound. Guards would hear footsteps, voices, and equipment sounds that seemed to come from areas they had already searched. Each time they investigated, they found nothing, increasing their frustration and confusion. Meanwhile, Wright was making steady progress through the maintenance tunnels with the 4 hostages. The lighting in the tunnels actually worked in their favor now, allowing them to move quickly without stumbling in the darkness that was hampering the guards above them. Dr. Sarah Kim, the youngest of the hostages, was keeping up well with Wright's pace, but Dr. Robert Chun was struggling. At 62 years old and suffering from a heart condition, he wasn't built for the physical demands of a combat extraction. I need to rest, Dr. Chun gasped as they reached a junction in the tunnel system. Wright checked his watch. They were still on schedule, but barely. 30 seconds, he told the elderly engineer. Then, we have to keep moving. Above them, Kozlov was trying to regain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his ability to manage. His men were reporting contact with enemies that disappeared when they tried to engage them. Equipment was failing in ways that suggested sabotage, but his technicians couldn't identify the source of the problems. And somewhere in his compound, American Special Operations soldiers were moving with impunity through defensive positions that should have been impenetrable. For the first time in his military career, Kozlov was facing an enemy that was smarter than he was, and the realization was both humbling and terrifying. Control to all teams, he transmitted. Fall back to preset defensive positions around the hostage building. If we can't find them, we'll make them come to us. Sarah heard the transmission and smiled grimly. Kozlov was making exactly the mistake she had hoped for. By concentrating his forces around the hostage building, he was leaving the extraction route undefended. He didn't know that, right? And the hostages had already left the building through routes that didn't appear on any of the compound's architectural plans. Extraction team, you have clear passage to the vehicle bay, she transmitted. Most guards have moved to defensive positions around the hostage building. Wright led the hostages up a service ladder that brought them to ground level in the compound's motor pool. The area was darker than the tunnels had been, but Wright's night vision equipment allowed him to navigate effectively. More importantly, Kim's sabotage of the security systems meant that no alarms would sound when they entered areas that should have been off-limits to unauthorized personnel. The vehicle that Sarah had selected for their extraction was a modified SUV that the compound's guards used for patrol operations. It was armored against small arms fire, equipped with off-road tires for desert travel, and familiar enough that other guards might not immediately recognize it as a threat. Wright had studied the vehicle's systems during his reconnaissance, and he was able to start it using techniques he had learned during his training in unconventional warfare. The engine turned over smoothly, its sound masked by the noise of generators and radio chatter from the confused guards. Extraction team is mobile, Wright reported as he guided the vehicle toward the compound's main gate. The gate itself presented a significant obstacle. It was designed to stop unauthorized vehicles, and the guard post was still manned despite the chaos elsewhere in the compound. But Sarah had planned for this contingency. Overwatch, I need you to create a distraction at the gate, she transmitted. Anderson had been waiting for this moment. Using his sniper rifle, he fired a shot that struck the guard post communication antenna, disabling their ability to report the vehicle's departure. A second shot destroyed the floodlight that illuminated the gate area, plunging it into darkness. The guards at the gate immediately took cover, assuming they were under direct attack. In the darkness and confusion, they failed to notice the SUV approaching until it was too late to stop it. Wright accelerated through the gate, using the vehicle's weight and momentum to smash through the barrier that was designed to stop unauthorized departures. The guards fired several shots at the departing vehicle, but the armor plating deflected the bullets without causing significant damage. As they cleared the compound's perimeter, Wright activated the vehicle's radio jamming equipment to prevent the guards from coordinating a pursuit. The desert road ahead was rough and poorly maintained, but the SUV was designed for exactly these conditions. Control, this is Extraction Team, Wright reported. Package is secure and moving to Extraction Point Alpha. Sarah felt a surge of relief as she confirmed that all 4 hostages were safely out of the compound. But the mission wasn't over yet. They still needed to reach the helicopter landing zone and get the hostages out of the country before Kozlov could organize a pursuit or call for assistance from local authorities. Thompson and Martinez were already moving to the landing zone to prepare for the helicopter extraction. Their job was to secure the area and provide covering fire if enemy forces attempted to interfere with the pickup. Anderson remained in his overwatch position, using his scope to monitor the compound and report on any pursuit efforts. What he saw was both encouraging and concerning. Control, this is Overwatch. Enemy forces are still in the compound, but they appear to be consolidating rather than pursuing. Kozlov may be planning something. Sarah studied the intelligence reports on her laptop. Kozlov had access to vehicles and possibly air support from local military units. If he realized how badly he had been outmaneuvered, he might decide to cut his losses and eliminate the evidence of his failure. All stations, be advised that enemy may attempt to destroy compound to eliminate evidence, she transmitted. Expedite extraction procedures. The helicopter pilot had been monitoring their communications and was already starting his engines when he received the extraction order. The modified Black Hawk rose from the submarine's deck and headed toward the desert landing zone at maximum speed. Wright pushed the SUV as hard as he dared on the rough desert road, knowing that every minute they saved could be crucial if Kozlov decided to pursue them. The hostages were holding up well despite their ordeal, and Dr. Chin's condition had stabilized now that they were no longer moving through confined spaces. "How did you find us?" Dr. Walsh asked as Wright navigated around a particularly large pothole. "Military intelligence," Wright replied simply. "Your government doesn't abandon its people." But the truth was more complex than Wright's simple answer suggested. Finding the hostages had required months of careful intelligence gathering, analysis of intercepted communications, and the kind of technological capabilities that most people couldn't imagine. Sarah's team represented the cutting edge of American special operations, and tonight's mission had pushed those capabilities to their limits. At the landing zone, Thompson and Martinez had established a secure perimeter and confirmed that the area was clear of enemy forces. The helicopter appeared on schedule, its pilot using terrain-following flight patterns to avoid detection by radar systems that might be monitoring the area. The extraction itself took less than 3 minutes. Wright brought the SUV to a stop next to the landing zone, and the hostages were quickly transferred to the helicopter. Medical personnel on board immediately began assessing their condition and providing treatment for the effects of their captivity. As the helicopter lifted off and headed toward the safety of international waters, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that the mission had succeeded. 4 American engineers were safe, and intelligence that could have compromised national security remained out of enemy hands. But the personal cost of success was becoming clear. Sarah's cover identity had been compromised beyond repair, and her career in special operations was effectively over. After tonight, Sarah Mitchell would disappear just as completely as Rebecca Chun had vanished 8 years earlier. On the submarine, Admiral Harrison was waiting with new orders that would begin Sarah's transition to a different kind of service. The woman who had commanded America's most elite special operations unit would soon become someone else entirely, with a new name, a new background, and new challenges that she couldn't yet imagine. The arrest that had started this entire sequence of events seemed like a lifetime ago. Sarah realized that the police officers who had detained her for impersonating a military officer had unknowingly triggered the end of one phase of her career and the beginning of another. But as she watched the helicopter disappear into the darkness, carrying 4 people who would return safely to their families, Sarah knew that some prices were worth paying. In a world where threats came from enemies who didn't wear uniforms or respect international law, someone had to be willing to fight in the shadows, to sacrifice personal recognition for the greater good, and to bear the weight of secrets that could never be shared. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of becoming someone new. But tonight, she was still Commander Sarah Mitchell, and she had just completed the most important mission of her career.